Hi, and this is the Painting with Commentary for episode 26 of Paint to Life, the Nolzur's Marvelous Miniature Storm Giant. I'm GMA Tank, and I'm going to be walking you through what I did on this model and everything that I was thinking about as I went along. So if you've got it, let's get going. So, this is the painted version of this finished model that comes from WizKids. So that's your kind of inspiration for this, but Storm Giants can live both above land and in the ocean, and I wanted to do an underwater model. This was a prototype for what I was hoping to do with this for my video and my pictures. I was going to paint the model and submerge them in this little aquarium that I had and film it and take those pictures. And it was very ambitious, but this model ended up taking a lot of time, and I was worried that, since I put out a Paint to Life a week, I would ruin the paint job. So I abandoned that when I saw this picture on the internet of a woman walking a shark, and that gave me the inspiration for what ultimately became this model. So I went to the dollar store, I bought that little shark model for $1. I took the miniature, as you see here, I took his lightning bolt out, and I drilled a hole in his hand and removed him from his base, and thus this Tempus Invicta was good in my head. I thought how he was holding that lightning bolt looked also like he was holding a leash. And again, with that shark on a leash picture, there was my inspiration, so I started. A little bit of WARPFIEND gray. The Storm Giants can have either purpley or blue or green skin. It's WARPFIEND gray, but it has a lovely violet hue to it. So I thought this would be good for skin tones, especially when I looked at my Frost Giant, who was blue, and my Stone Giant, who was gray, and the Fire Giant, who was even charcoal, like a darker gray. I didn't want to emulate any of those colors, so I suppose green would have been nice too, but given that he was an underwater Storm Giant, I wanted to go with the kind of purple, blue eyes kind of scheme. So as I went about painting, there were not many mold lines in this to remove, and I really did question if I should leave the lightning bolt. I don't particularly like the clear plastic pieces that come with Nolzurs. I don't know, I just find them very flat. People paint them really well, but every time I try it, they're okay, but as you know, on Paint to Life, I like to tell a story, and having this Storm Giant with a dire shark on a leash in my mind was giving me all kinds of ideas who ultimately would become his enemy's giant, like his enemy shark, which he then conquered, beat, and then took control of in a respect kind of way, and I liked it. Now, of course, you need a shark to do that. The shark that I got was a little big. It's supposed to be, like, the Storm Giant stands about 30 feet tall, and the shark is about as tall as him, which is a pretty big shark, so that's like Megalodon status, or perhaps dire shark, if you will. I would have preferred it to be a little smaller, but again, beggars can't be choosers when you run to the dollar store to get something to accompany your mini. So that's what we ended up having in the finished shot. But ultimately, I was really happy with the way this whole thing turned out, so I'm not complaining whatsoever. So just finishing up the rest of his fleshy areas, I put a couple coats on, and now I get my little drill, and I'm drilling a hole. I'm drilling out the clear plastic that was between his hands so that I can feed the leash through there. Now for some RHINOX hide on his boots, I wanted to have like a very dark brown look to it, like a very Roman look, because that's what the armor appeals to me. And again, looking at the source material in the Dungeon Master Guide, which I will link right here, again, using that as kind of my color scheme for colors as well, and his armor, his weapon, and all that is kind of where it came from additionally. So again, thin, light paints, watered paints down on your wet palette. When you put some out of your pot, if you're using CITADEL, add some water to it just to thin it out, and then this RHINOX goes on pretty heavy, but the WARPFIEND gray I ended up doing two light coats. You only saw one on film, but it comes out really nice when it goes on light and you build it up slowly. So this RHINOX is the foundation for his armor and his boots. I was trying to think. Taking him off his base makes painting this quite easy, but it also means that you have to put your hands all over when you're holding him. These Nolzur models are very big. It's hard to put them in like sticky tack or holder. So, a couple times I You know, even though that WARPFIEND gray was dry, my fingers were warm and I left fingerprints on them, which is not ideal. Now again, because it's so big, it was easy to correct, but you just want to make sure that that's not the case whenever possible. Do your best to hold areas you have yet to paint. That's all I'll say about that. Now, Granite Steel is a wonderful metallic paint from Citadel. It has a nice shiny blue to it. It's very Cavalry Knight in my opinion, and I wanted it for its underwater kind of blue flavor. So any of the scale mail that the Storm Giant is wearing, that Tempus is wearing, I hit with the Granite Steel, as opposed to an Iron Warriors or a LEADBELCHER, which are much more black grays, whereas this has got a nice blue hue to it. I do his helmet with this same color, but then later I'm going to dress the helmet with a shade, a violet shade, to kind of turn it purple, almost like Thanos' helmet from Avengers. I wasn't sure I loved it, so I kept it on the helmet. I didn't do the rest of his armor that way, which is why the finished miniature has kind of a purple metallic helmet, whereas his armor that we're painting right here in this shot is still silver. So the under of the crotch area, Dark Reaper. I'm not actually sure that that's Dark Reaper. That might be a different color. You know, this is one of those things you have to paint. You can't leave it there. It'll look like he's got a big white panty liner on. But, you know, no one's ever really going to see it. So blacks, grays, and something dark to just kind of shadow it. So now back to the helmet, like I said. Just in case someone catches a glimpse under the table of his upskirt, you don't want to have not painted it. But as I was saying, yeah, breaking him off the base is essential to get at those boots. And also, if you're going to be putting him on a custom base like I ended up doing, you don't want to have his big wad of gum. It's what I call those bases that these things come on. Sometimes they're great if you're just going to go with it, but if you're making some custom, you want to remove them. Apothecary White contrast paint. So he has these robes on, and I wanted to keep them white. You know, he's not quite a cloud giant, he's a storm giant. This Apothecary White dries with a nice gray undertone with white highlights, and you can highlight it further on the top, so either dry brushing or using layers, which I don't even think I did. I try to keep him very simple. Originally, remember, I thought I was going to be putting him underwater. You have to understand, though, it takes me a week to paint this whole episode and the story, and I don't have time to accidentally bleach my model or wreck it and have to repaint it again because I was trying something neat. So that's why I included the footage at the beginning so you could see, and I might try it again for another model in the future, maybe something not as all-inclusive as this. I used MOURNFANG brown to complement the RHINOX hide for the backside of the boots, as well as some straps and belts. It's just a nice go-to brown. Again, didn't put much shade. I didn't use any Agrax Earth shade. I didn't use any Nuln oil. I wanted this paint job to be extremely one-dimensional. I just wanted him to look super clean. You know, anytime you use shaders, they add darkness in the crevices and shadows, but underwater, he wouldn't have any of that. I mean, there would be darkness and shadows, sure, but he wouldn't have the grime that sometimes that stuff looks like. Nuln oil fills those creases with black lines. Well, he's going to be like completely clean being underwater. So this is a very just paint by numbers, all the areas I wanted to do, with a little bit of layering, but not anything spectacular as it comes to washes or dry brushes. So we're setting up for back to RHINOX hide for these Roman-ish looking leather pieces on his tunic. RHINOX hide here, I don't know if it was the particular mini, if it had some residue from the process. It went on thinner than it did on the boots. I think I did the boots with one coat, but this I had to do in 2 coats. As I brushed it on, it was kind of wicking away from the center, and I realized, oh boy. So I could have either added more paint and made it gloppy, or just let it go on light, let it dry, and then add a second coat, which is what I ultimately did. People say you can wash these things before you paint them. It's really not a bad idea. There's oils and cleaning solvents that they use to get them out of the molds that sometimes lingers after they come out, and washing will take that away with soap and water. So Retributor armor is the trim. Goes nice with that dark brown, and pretty much, again, following the source material from the Monsters Manual, it's going to go everywhere. And this is a little deceiving, in the video, you see me do one coat and put it in various areas. This Retributor Armor Gold was probably the hardest part of this whole mini, is how many times I had to go back onto it, because I'd spill a little on his leg, or I'd spill a little on the RHINOX hide, or on his backside, MOURNFANG brown. There's all these little teeny jewelets and things along the front of the boot that they look like lattices, which I hit with this. And, you know, I put it on a little thick, a little heavy. I had to go back and touch it up. And that's okay. I mean, you should be having fun when you're painting. You should never let good enough be. If you think you can hit it again and get a better effect, you should. Maybe not even the same day. Maybe come at it tomorrow after you've had some rest, and you'll see a bunch of spots you missed. And then you can touch them up again later. So Baneblade Brown, this is the alternate color for the belt. I also use this on the laces behind his boots. Also, an interesting fact about his legs. I think there was like a sculpting mistake. I'm going to put another tag here. If I can find a shot or a picture of it, I'll link it here for you to see. His leg looks like it's supposed to go into his boot, but there's one spot. Is that it there? Yeah, that's it there. I'll put an arrow. You can see it. Is it supposed to be boot or is it supposed to be leg? I painted it to look like leg because if you paint it to look like boot, the boot looks weird and they're not even. So I'll show you with an arrow back there and you can see what I mean. I just went with leg. You can go with boot if you want, but I think you'll see if our sculpts are the same, we'll have the same problem. So Death World Forest, this added a little green to the paint. And there's all kinds of details in those baldrons that I used the SIGMARITE. Eventually, we'll get to that step. Actually, I should just wait. So Administratum Gray, it's a boring beard. I didn't get crazy again. Storm Giant, I didn't want to go with any kind of fire beard or something neat. Or at least I was following the book. So Administratum Gray on his mustache and his beard, the backside of his hair. Then we'll do a bit of dry brushing with Praxeti White, which is coming up next. So as I was saying, those spaldrons have a bunch of intricate lines throughout them, which are quite high and raised up, so we can hit them later with a dry brush to bring them out. So there's the beard, and now we're going to use MOURNFANG Brown. I changed this a bit up, you'll probably see in the finished model. It was just it was the wrong color to use that there. So LEADBELCHER for the sword, it's like my go-to weapon color. I did 2 coats of it. I wanted it nice and shiny because it is reflective and it's a super clean and bright model. Now I saw someone on a forum take that sword out of his hand to easier paint the model. I'm pretty sure they broke the sword. I think it separates in his hand. I don't think it's meant to come out. But with that said, you could most certainly take it out should you want to access the whole body. I noticed when I was bending the sword to get at parts underneath it, it felt like it was getting loose at his hand. So I bet you if I kept prying with it like a loose tooth, it would have popped right off. So if you're painting this model, make sure you're careful to either take the sword off at the beginning and glue it back when you're done, or just be cautious that you don't wreck it. It is a pretty stupid looking sword to have it pointed down like that, in my opinion, but whatever. So here's the SIGMARITE dry brush. Just holding my brush up as high as possible, trying not to hit that Death Bright green underneath it, or Death Forest, Death Heads Forest, whatever that green is called, and just brushing it so that all that whatever that stuff is called, lace, or all that texture in the green pops right up in this SIGMARITE hits it, and then it's good. And while we're dry brushing, let's do the beard, Praxeti White on top of the Administratum Gray. It gives a nice two-tone beard effect. Again, though, not going too crazy with shades to make it too dark or all that jazz. That's his hair. Very nice. Okay, now to the DRUCHI Violet. Again, as you can see, a little bit of that shader on that Grey Knight steel, and now you have a purple helmet. And he looks like Grimace. Or Thanos. Whichever. I don't know if it really goes with the gold. I took some of it off. It was a little too heavy. I didn't want it to drip on his hair, and I didn't want it to look purple. I wanted it to look like purple metal. So now on to Shark Boy. So there's the finished shark from the dollar store, primed with a Wraithbone white. Okay, and you know, it's not the best model as far as details. I did my best to scrape it clean, like remove the mold lines up front. There was one mold line in particular I couldn't do anything about, though. That was the circlet around his neck. You can see it right there, very deep gouge, because that's where the plastic, I mean, it's a dollar store toy, folks. The thing costs about 7 cents to make in China. So you're not going to get much out of it. Unfortunately, I didn't take a very good picture of the before, but trust me when I say it was terrible. So we're going to make a great white shark out of this thing. So start with some more of the administrative gray, which I already had out for his beard, for Tempus's beard. And holding on those pec fins, just giving him a nice gray coating. The great thing about painting animals is there's lots of source material on the web. It looks like I'm keeping it up high. See how I'm not going down to his belly, just from the midsection and up. Now I'm using another gray, a little bit darker. This is Dawnstone. It's going to go down a wet blend to the bottom where the administrative gray meets the Wraithbone white primer. Because the Wraithbone white on... Oh, I'm sorry. It was not Wraithbone white. It was Corax white. I did the first... Yeah, fun fact. I actually painted 2 sharks. The first one came out way too green. Here's a picture. So I painted a second one. Another reason why this video took so long. And you can see this time I used Corax white instead of Wraithbone white. And it does matter because Wraithbone is very beigey and this one is white. So it looks like I can just use it. I don't have to paint the bottom white. So Basilicanum gray, a horrible contrast paint. I hate this gray. I hate it. It goes on so thin, and I almost threw it out one time when I tried to use it on my Bahir video, with which Lothar, the obedient, in episode whatever that was. Although for a great white shark, it does kind of work. I mean, see, it still has horrible coverage. It's still, you know, it's hard to push it around without leaving brush strokes everywhere. But the color and the transparency with the grays that I did actually does leave for a good great white gray. So I guess I won't throw it out. And now gloss medium on top. I want this shark to look wet. So I'm not going crazy. I did a little bit of white on his teeth. We're not putting blood in his mouth. Don't make his mouth blood red inside. A great white's mouth is the same color as its skin, right? And its teeth, I mean, it might have blood ripped around the gums. This model didn't have the definition to do anything fancy. So let's just goop him up with this medium so when it dries, he looks glossy and wet, and we are moving on. Cut a hole in his belly and slide a piece of Tigra up his there to hold him in place, which will be in the final shot. So here's going to be the custom base. XPS foam, cut with a semicircle. There's the altar. It came from Reaper. It was primed black and then just dry brush gray. Here are all the pieces I was going to use, including the finished shark and all the little pieces of whatever. So I used a pen. I used the backside of a pencil to draw out some lines to make bricks. I'm just using my wire cutter to using my lines, just tap 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 and then pull along to get like a more natural look, and then just zip zip zip. I'm making tiles. The concept was this altar was in an underwater temple, so obviously I need to have some temple stones, and instead of individually making them, I just did them in a lattice like this. And to do the other section, I don't think you see in the video, I actually broke the glue off of that semicircle piece at the top so I could easily do that, the first step, because I couldn't reach it from here obviously. So I'm like, how am I going to do that? Oh, I know, I'll just break the glue off. It was just white glue. But once it's done, now we have this. Now this is a fun trick. Acetone in a bottle, a spray bottle. Spray, spray, spray. It's like nail polish remover. Spray it all over. I've done this before in my videos. It melts and leaves pits. Now I push down hard, push to squish them out a bit to make them a little smoother. And now to prime this thing, grade craft paint. It's all you need. I used from Michaels. I added some thinner to it. And there it is finished. Now some dark Reaper on the seabed, because I didn't want to have gray seabed. I wanted to have sandy blue-gray. Now Praxeti white again, dry brush on these marble tiles. Now that I've pushed them down to press them with my fingers to soften the edges on top of the acetone spray, it really gives it enough texture that when I dry brush it, you say, okay, yep, no, that totally looks like, not just rock, but like a stone tile. Now, I suppose being underwater, it could have turned green with algae. I didn't want to mess with that. I just kept it the way it was. That's a little toilet paper with sand inside. Thing I used in the spider episode where I put the cocoons on the last Paint to Life video. Same kind of idea. Hot glue, a lot of hot glue for the assembly on this, folks. A lot of these pieces I needed to bind really quickly. I usually use PVA glue, but I needed some quick action to put all this together, so I used a lot of hot glue to put this together, and then some super glue. So I used some dark Reaper paint on that spiderling thing and around the base just to make it look like a build-up. And then I used some milliput to create these little teeny, they look like beads with holes in them, just little holders, little corals. I went to my kid's fish tank and snipped off a couple of those pieces. See the yellow one and the red one. It's an underwater reef, so you get creative. Anything you can find, any flocking or any teeny moss. I had moss. I pulled strands out that look like seaweed and glued them individually in places. You know, and there you go. That's how those are going to work. Here we go. Here's a piece of that moss stuff. Tuck it in there on the... And again, see, I didn't use too much glue, like PVA glue, because I needed to dry quicker. But there's a little piece again of it's plastic. They're little plastic aquarium pieces, but they perfectly fit what I need for this particular base. That's some autumn leaves flocking from Army Painter. When broken up, I'm like, those look like little corals. So of course, get out the hot glue or the well, yeah, it looks like I PVA'd those on. Just put them in place with the two tweezers around that outcropping, and next thing you know, you have a colorful coral base. Now, I didn't document the entirety of this because this is for you. I will say the last part I did though was I put some PVA glue and water mix down all over it where I wanted, and then I added some sand for it to dry, including on where the altar's going to be. And that was it, folks. That's the finished Tempus Invicta, his finished aquarium looking underwater base with his shark on a leash. That chain I had from Green Stuff World, it wrapped right around that seam on the shark's neck, so it hid it. Not only did it hide it, it served a function. It was then run through, and I glued it onto the shark as well. I ran it through the hole in the giant's hand, and then up and over his shoulder, like gives some slack, the illusion that he can let the shark kind of go up ahead, let it off the lead a little bit. So that gray white turned out pretty good for a dollar store toy, if you ask me. I also had some clay brick, little teeny white marble bricks there that I put onto the altar to make it look like a bit more of a ruin. There's his backside with all the gold tassels done. So if you have any questions about this or want to reach out to me, by all means, you can reach me at paintalife@gmail.com or in the comments below on this video. As always, thanks for watching. Look forward to doing another video with you guys next week. I'm GMA Tank. That's it. Wash your hands, people.